Good day, everyone. I'm one of those people that actually believe that post-lunch fatigue does exist, but I think all of you in this room made the right choice of coming here and not anywhere else. And I think we will not be those suffering for this kind of syndrome. So thank you all for coming. This is a panel called Peace Metrics, Reflection on Rebuilding European Security Order. My name is Nemanja Džuverović. I'm professor here at the University of Belgrade, and I will be a moderator of this panel. Before I give a short context about the panel and present my panelists, I have two important announcements. This panel is a bit different from all other panels. So this panel is actually held under Chatham House rules. Others are not, so please have that in mind. And also due to security reasons, it's not allowed to take any pictures of the panel, except the organizers who actually know how to take pictures. So please have in mind these two issues, and thank you for understanding. This panel is dedicated to something called Peace Matrix. This is a matrix developed as part of the project called Conversation on European Security, and it is designed by Geneva Center for Security Policy and Friedrich Ebert Stiftung from Vienna. And the whole idea and the background of the project is to offer a roadmap for political, diplomatic, and security steps in building a future European security order. And it draws insights from experts across Europe, North America, Russia, and Ukraine, and identifies which steps are feasible, how priorities can be aligned, and where external support can reinforce pathways to peace. For those of you who might not see this, we have some key questions that we will try to answer in a presentation part, but also discussion can go further. The key question that this panel will tackle is actually how sustainable peace in Europe could be achieved, how can European actors synchronize diplomatic, security, and reconstruction efforts, what are the challenges that will need to be addressed for different negotiation tracks, and what are the building blocks for a future European security order. And all of these questions are actually tied to the peace matrix that will be presented here. And since I'm just a moderator, not a star of this show, I have 3 stars on my right. I'm going to present them briefly and then explain how we're going to proceed. So first of all, we have Alexandra, who is director of the International Security Dialogue Department at the Geneva Center for Security Policy. Her research focuses on European security, the role and evolution of OSCE, a Russia relationship across the Euro-Asian region. In addition to this work, Alexandra is a regular speaker at international conferences and forums, and she also plays a role in education and training in a center, where she teaches a flagship program including European Security Course, the Leadership International Security Course, and the Swiss Military Professional Officers Training. Next to her, we have Christos Katsioulis, Director of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Regional Office for Cooperation and Peace in Europe. And he's working in the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. He started as a policy officer. I wanted to say police officer, but I stopped there on the time. In the EU office in Brussels, as an expert on foreign policy in the International Policy Analysis Unit in Berlin. After that, he founded and headed FES office in Athens. Later, he headed the EU office in Brussels, as well as the London office of Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. Christos has been a regular commentator on European affairs in the German, as well as international media, and regular contributor for the journal International, oh, my German is not good, but International Politik and Gesellschaft. And finally, we have Zaur Shiriyev, who is a non-resident scholar at the Carnegie Russian Eurasia Center. His research focuses on security, conflict resolution, and foreign policy issues relating to South Caucasus, energy security, and supply routes across that region, Southeast Europe and Central Asia, and Azerbaijani and Turkish foreign policy. He has also taken active steps in expert meetings on Azerbaijan and Armenia peace process. I have checked with Zaur, and he didn't participate in Azerbaijani-Albania process, only the one with Armenia. For 6 years, he has been analyst for International Crisis Group, writing reports on security and conflict issues in South Caucasus. And before that, he was a resident academy fellow and non-resident academy associate with the Russian Eurasia program at the Chatham House. So as you see, we have 3 excellent panelists and experts. And the order of business is as follows. First, we will have it will be a bit different structure than maybe the other panels. We will first have a presentation of what is actually peace matrix, design, the goals, what aims to achieve. After that, we have a big, broader picture. We're going to try to put a peace matrix in a kind of more Euro-Asian global perspective. And then we will open for questions and comments from the audience. And I'm sure, having in mind the nature of the panel and very innovative approach that Peace Matrix is taking, that there will be plenty of points of discussion that will come after the presentation. So without further ado, I will give floor to Alexandra to present the Peace Matrix.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, for this kind introduction. I would also like to thank the organizers of this conference for agreeing to host this event and for letting us present to you our joint work. Maybe that you understand the nature of our work, I just first say a few words about the organization I'm working on. It's the Geneva Center for Security Policy. We are an international foundation, and we focus on providing safe and neutral platform for Track 2 and Track 1.5 dialogues. For the ones who are not familiar with this terminology, when we talk about Track 1, so those are discussions on official level between the heads of states, ministers, diplomats, which we see nowadays blocked. There is not much desire for the countries and governments to talk to each other. And therefore, what we do, we facilitate these informal discussions between the experts, but experts are always connected to the decision makers, policy makers, so they come already briefed by their governments, and when they come back from our discussions, they also bring the ideas back home, and we hope also we can contribute to the potential renewal or, in the cases when they already exist, Track 1 negotiations. So the work that we're presenting today is the result of one of these Track 2 dialogues that we have launched 3.5 years ago, together with our partners from Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Regional Office in Vienna. And the aim of this dialogue was to reflect on the future of European security. We all agree that today, and probably for the years to come, the European security order will be dominated by deterrence. The European states have been strengthening their military capacities due to the war in Ukraine, but also following the return of Donald Trump to the Oval Office and his statements suggesting potential reduction of US support to its European allies. So prompting basically Europe to assume greater responsibility for its own security. However, we believe that solely relying on deterrence comes with risks. Without communication channels between opponents, distrust deepens, misperceptions grow, and the chances of accidental escalation arises. And that's why we brought together this group of renowned experts from United States, Europe, Ukraine, and Russia. And also, for our last meeting, we actually added an expert from China, because we believe that China will also play an important role in the European security order. So after 3 years of work, we have come with this intermediate result that we are now widely sharing in different European capitals, but also in United States. And for a change, it's not a 50 pages report that nowadays people don't read, but it's a graphic illustration of our reflections that we call the Peace Matrix. I don't know if we will have a chance to project it on the screen. Otherwise, we have here, maybe for you afterwards, some of the printed copies. So basically, we look at European security comprehensively, and on the horizontal axis of this Peace Matrix, we represent 3 different lines of conflict that mainly affect European security. And that is the conflict between the United States and Russia, conflict between Europe and Russia, and of course, in the heart of it, the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Then on the vertical axis in this matrix, we depict 4 sets of objectives. the first one to be addressed. The first one is the de-escalation. It's more of a short-term and more immediate objective. Protecting Ukraine's statehood and sovereignty. The third objective is rebuilding the European security order. And finally, we also look at the global, we call it global ecosystem, but that's the idea to see how the European security order will be inserted in this changing global security order, where some experts would consider we are moving towards the multipolarity and multipolar world. So where Europe is standing here. So we populated this matrix with hexagons, which represent different challenges, issues, but also the building blocks, or sometimes we don't like the word block, we can say building parts, that we would need to address in these different conflict lines to rebuild European security. So in itself, this work represents explicit and implicit recommendations for policymakers. And also, these three different lines of conflict would need to be addressed through separate negotiation tracks. And every negotiation track would need to have its own set of relevant stakeholders. At the same time, all the three lines of conflicts are interconnected. There are linkages between them. There is no rigid sequencing. But it's clear that without progress on the Ukraine-Russia conflict, we cannot expect a major improvement elsewhere. Central point of our peace matrix in bold, it's the decalogue, the 10 principles of the Helsinki Final Act, the 10 principles that we came up with 50 years ago. We believe that these principles are still valuable, and that sooner or later we would need to recommit to those principles, but also address the existing dilemmas of these principles. For example, the dilemma of freedom to join security alliances versus the indivisibility of security. Ideally, based on this peace matrix, it would be important to establish a roadmap or a process, meaning we would need to identify who, where, how regularly, which additional expertise to bring on the table for all these different negotiation tracks. And finally, we believe that it's important to move away from today's short-term reactive approaches on European security, but to start developing strategic vision of the longer term on European security. And for this, we would need to address the core interests of all parties and also take seriously the threat perceptions of all parties, even if we don't agree with them. So I think I will stop here, and we will be happy to, dig deeper in the issues in our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Before I give floor to Christos, I'm just saying that our organizers are working hard to put, and they have managed to put peace metrics behind us, so you can actually have a visual also interpretation of what Alexandra was saying. So, Christos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you also very much for the invitation and the opportunity to have this discussion with you. Since Alexandra explained what the GCSP is, let me have 2 sentences about the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung. We're a German political foundation close to the Social Democratic Party in Germany. We have offices, approximately 100 offices all over the world, also one here in Belgrade, represented by my colleague Ivana Radzic here on the table. And we're working, especially in Europe, towards kind of a fair European Union, a European together that is kind of coined by justice, fairness, and peace. And the office in Vienna is in Vienna because of the OSCE and our focus on the questions of an overarching security architecture in Europe. And that's the point which brings me directly to the peace matrix. It's about rebuilding European security order. We sometimes spoke, at least in the past, about a European security architecture. And an architecture implies a building plan. It implies a structure. But our problem at the moment is, due to the Russian war against Ukraine, that we have no idea what that structure could be. We don't have a building plan. And we don't have the hubris as institutions to say we have it. But what we know is the issues and aspects that need to be parts of this building plan, and that's what the peace matrix is about. It is, and I shortly go over from the advertisement to the why we're here, it's a start for a debate, and that's how we use it. We use that to kind of visualize, on the one hand, what we have discussed with the expert groups, but on the other hand, to make clear to especially policymakers and decision makers in Europe that these are the challenges that lie ahead of us, and we need to position ourselves to that. They're complex, they're interconnected, but it's not enough just to react. It's absolutely necessary to have an idea and to have your own idea about how to proceed with that. And let me explain that with an example from Finland. In Finland last week, two presidents, the current and the previous one, had kind of a debate. The previous president, Niinistö, said, we need a European dialogue with Russia. And his successor, Alexander Stubb, said, yes, indeed, but first we need a position to have this dialogue with Russia. I think both of them are right. I think we need this dialogue, but we need it based on common European positions. And here, one of the biggest problems also that is also clear in our peace matrix comes about. When we discussed this peace matrix and we had the level of collision between Europe and Russia, a question many of our American counterparts asked was, who's speaking for Europe? Who's Europe? And it's still unclear. We have this coalition of the willing now, but I would suspect that the positions concerning many of these issues that we have here on our matrix, about the European Assurance Force, about security guarantees for Russia, security guarantees for Ukraine, I'm sorry, about the military balance, and all of these questions, there are huge divisions, and we need to start this debate. We need to understand that if Europe is not kind of facing up to that task, it's not that nothing will happen. We already see that there are negotiations taking place. President Trump is negotiating with the Russians. Ukraine is negotiating with the Russians on different levels and on different matters, but there are already these courses of negotiation going on. And if we do not act, if we do not come up with our own positions, President Trump will negotiate for us whilst Europe is paying the bills. That's not something I would agree with. So the idea is kind of to make clear what these matters are that are on the table. So the peace matrix is more like kind of the pieces of the puzzle that needs to be put together. But the art here is that it's a different picture depending on who will put the puzzle together. What we did, and that goes into the direction of what Alexandra presented, we thought about sequencing. How would it look like? Where would be the way through this matrix towards a sustainable peace? And we red teamed it and said, what if President Trump went through it? And it's a different way. So this makes clear what challenges lie ahead and that we need to approach it from a European point of view. The feedback that we have got up until now is worked into the matrix. So what you see here on the screen, and I think there are a few copies still on the table with the water back there, because otherwise you feel like you're in the ophthalmologist's office and you need new glasses. It's work in progress. It's kind of revised every time we have a debate, every time we meet people and get feedback, there's something being changed. And we deliberately let some of these hexagons open to make clear that this is a process that is ongoing. European security will need to be built in the next years and probably decades. To finish on a maybe more positive note, when we start, or maybe not so positive, as you can see, what we haven't included as a level of collision is between Europe and the United States, or between Ukraine and the United States. When we developed this matrix, that was in a pre-Trumpian world. We thought that these are different levels of collision, but what is needed is a level of coordination between them. And what we see right now is that maybe that's not enough. It's not just coordination, it's maybe also negotiation between Europe and the United States, between Ukraine and the United States, on how to kind of devise and divide the different roles in European security in the future. The Russian war against Ukraine has shattered European security order, and the decisions taken by this new administration will also have an immense effect on how European security will be looking like in the decades to come. And I'll stop here. I'm really looking forward to the debate. Let me say a very last word. We had up until now about 10 to 15 discussions of this peace matrix. And we never had a debate where somebody agreed with it 100%. We always had a lot of pushback, and that's what we're looking for. It's kind of testing it, it's kind of bringing into it new ideas, challenging it. So I'm really looking forward to us discussing very intensively with each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Christoph. I really like this analogy between puzzle and matrix. The only difference is that puzzle can have 50 pieces, but it can also have 10,000 pieces, right? So there are different ways of seeing it puzzle. Yes, before I give floor to Zaur, I think Alexandra wanted to have some intervention before that.
No, just a two-finger. I agree completely with what Christos said. But I think we had some negative reactions, but we also had actually a lot of positive reactions. And very often we hear that no one is thinking about negotiations and how to move forward, and a lot of people find it as a useful exercise. So I think that also shows the polarization sometimes that we have, and exactly, and that's why we look also forward to the discussions, because there are always some strong positive or negative reactions to that. Thank you.
Thank you. And as kind of already mentioned, so we're gonna, after this presentation of Peace Index, we're gonna zoom out a bit, and Zaur will give a kind of more broader perspective in which Peace Matrix is actually situated. So Zaur, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, I'm going to explain, or at least I will try to explain how some elements of the peace matrix actually played a role in Azerbaijan-Armenian negotiation, and also how also the Black Sea, the Caucasus is is important for the European security, and also why the European security framework is struggling nowadays. For sure, the war in Ukraine has alerted the entire Eastern neighborhood. It has produced not a temporary fraction, but also structural shift, and also we see in the Black Sea and the Caucasus. But European security is no longer defined by only by Europe. It's shaped by ecosystem of regions surrounding it, and it includes the Caucasus, the Turkey, Black Sea. And because it's from energy security to food supply, these regions are interconnected. The main reason that the European security actually struggled, not with the Ukrainian war, but before that, because it actually designed for a world in which Russia was perceived as a stable status quo player, and which regions surrounding Europe were treated distant or secondary. But I think that today this assumption is not the correct. So in order to illustrate the shift, I would like to turn to Azerbaijan-Armenian conflict. So for decades, 26 years, Azerbaijan-Armenia negotiated with the help of the OIC Minsk Group, which is co-chaired by Russia, the France, and United States. And its failure was not due to the lack of expertise or the good intention, but it failed because the format was overly centralized, rigid, and unable to adapt the realities on the ground. It actually also ignored the reality, also the role of the other middle powers, including Turkey. And so over time, it became a status quo format. So the only things actually united Russia, France, and United States actually keeping the status quo. You know that we have a very famous saying is that whether Russia is a pro-Azerbaijani or pro-Russian, pro-Armenian, we always say that Russia is a pro-conflict. So it was that one of the reasons that it is actually failed. However, so when the 2020 war happened, the Russia intervened militarily and and designed the 5 years of the mandate of its so-called peacekeepers, and the Russian expectation was that this will be a longer term, 20 years, 30 years, that they're going to stay there. And also they prevented the peace talks between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And it is, you can find that clearly Russian leadership, the President Putin said that, so the peace is a longer term prospect, and also the future generation can talk about it. But now, what we have right now, we have peace agreement. It's also, let's say, finalized, pre-signed, and it's going to be signed. So it's actually what Russians actually assumed was wrong. However, Ukraine war actually changed the entire spectrum in the Caucasus. So between 2022 until 2023, the other actors, European Union, United States, actually they played a role and helped to help Azerbaijan, bring Azerbaijan and Armenia together. And until that time, in the 2 years, it was the absolute time for Russia. Russia actually mediated everything. Russia decided everything between Azerbaijan and Armenia, from the transport talks to the actually even exchange of the detainees. But since 2023, actually Azerbaijan and Armenia stopped even mediating, helping, seeking a mediation from European Union, United States, and they start, direct negotiation. What direct negotiation means? That it's not centralized negotiation. It has several layers. In the first layer is direct talks between the representatives of the leaders without public announcement. So they were actually did all job in the 2 years. Foreign ministers, security agencies, the border commission. So actually, it is not only centralized between Azerbaijan and Armenia, but also actually shaped. So all of these elements about the security guarantees, detainees, other issues actually discussed in parallel. And also, it was actually the first time Azerbaijan and Armenia decided not to involve Russia to this negotiation. So that's why in the 18 months they finalized the peace agreement. Before, assumption was that, so one side is weaker, Armenia, other side is stronger, so how they can negotiate. But let's imagine that there was always the third parties, like the European Union, United States, or Russia, but also, you know, that these two countries also negotiated not between them, also with these third parties. What was different in the new period is actually they negotiated, directly. Why I'm also talking about this, how also they negotiated with Russia, because I think that there is a cultural dimension of diplomacy is important. Might be it's often ignored in the European, discussion. What I mean, the cultural, EU is, diplomacy is built on a legalism, predictability, institutional frameworks, or transparency. It assumes that agreements generate obligation, negotiation follow logical sequencing, but I think Russian diplomacy does not operate this way. So it's deeply personalized, often improvisational, dependent on informal channels, and shaped by tactical ambiguity. So, and I think Azerbaijan and Armenia learned this and know this the better. So that's why these two countries understand this dynamic intimately, and they have negotiated with Russia for decades, not as an abstract actor, but as everyday reality. And they are also continuous doing this. And I think that peace matrix is partially designed to correct this mismatch. So it replaced the expectation of the coherence with a structure capable of absorbing ambiguity. It replaced a single track, but also it shows that actually you should have multiple tracks, and also you should discuss a different term. It might be not applicable to the, the Ukrainian conflict, because I will say that because scale, legal foundation, strategic stakes, and international involvement are entirely different. But when it comes to the European security and what can Ukraine lessons can be learned from Azerbaijan and Armenia, how they deal with Russia and each other, I think the few things. First of all, there's no ambition that peace matrix is going to resolve the war in Ukraine. But I think, it can help the Europe avoid the false expectations, prepare diplomatic scaffolding for when conditions eventually shift, and avoid repeating mistakes I will say that made in also the Caucasus, assuming the Russian control where none exists, relying on single negotiation channel, or waiting for comprehensive settlement that will never materialize. Azerbaijan and Armenia waited comprehensive settlements for 26 years, that there will be a big QS type of the meeting and they are going to resolve everything. It never happened. So, but I think the priority for Ukraine is not to push the premature negotiation, but strengthen Ukraine resilience, military, economically, or institutionally. So, and the time will come that there will be, how to say, comprehensive discussion about this, the, how to say, legitimate needs of the Ukraine. So this is short. I think I can talk about this more detail about these elements, but I think there is a short overview how some elements of the peace matter actually used by Azerbaijan and Armenia in their own negotiation.
Thank you so much for this kind of comparison between this Azerbaijani and Armenia talk with peace index. Hopefully we will not have to wait 26 years. In Ukrainian case, it will be resolved much sooner. So we agree, because of the topic, to keep it, and we are right on time, to keep it around half hour so we can leave plenty of time for questions and discussion and points. If you want to give a point around about peace metric as well, please kind of keep it around 2 minutes. And then if you have questions as well, just introduce yourself and ask questions to any of our panelists. Yes, thank you.
Thank you everyone for presenting us this peace matrix. It was really a pleasure. I'm Dr. Marina Kostić-Rulić. I'm Senior Research Fellow from the Institute of International Politics and Economics. I also lead the Center for Non-Proliferation, Arms Control and Disarmament of one think tank organization. But also I'm president of alumni club of Konrad Adenauer Foundation here in Serbia. But I really appreciate work of Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. And as I said, I really like to encourage you in all this work that you're doing. So my first point, when I was in Vienna in May, I really wanted to encourage Austria and all the other neutrals actually to do their role in international order, which means to call for negotiations. And that is my first point I wanted to stress, so to use this opportunity also to do this again and call. Otherwise, we will have negotiations on the European security in Alaska or somewhere else in the world and not in the Europe. I think it is very sad situation. We will have the panel about Swiss neutrality later. It's very sad that neutrals are losing their traditional roles in doing their mediation role. And my question is, of course, regarding, I just checked this for 5 minutes now. Maybe I will have more questions later, but for now, why did you put as a most difficult topic managing the security dilemma and arms control negotiations? Because that was always the priority in making European peace. Unfortunately, all arms control agreements are not existing anymore in Europe, but I really think that that should be the first starting point, because I believe that everything actually started because of this disruption of the balance of power and the lack of security guarantees. So I would start with the role of neutrals in mediation role, and of course with the arms control negotiations. And my proposal, I did it with one of my interns from the EU Non-Proliferation Disarmament Internship. We proposed a comprehensive conventional and nuclear arms control talks, something like nuclear and space talks in 1985. So that would be my first actually start in rebuilding European security order. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. Maybe we can pick up 1 or 2 more questions and then give floor to our panelists. Yes, please.
Okay. So I was wondering, I have a few questions, but I'll sum it up in one. So the situation with Ukraine and Russia and the situation with Europe and Russia, you did mention this, the military alliances and all of that, but I was wondering about one thing, and it is about the deterrence and the power. because the wars start because one side thinks they can win. Maybe united European army could be that deterrent that would stop further aggression from the Russian side and perhaps protect the rest of the Europe with that nuclear umbrella, because as we saw, the Russia didn't attack any nuclear power. They attack countries that are not nuclear, and we also have the situation where Ukraine believed Russia and they gave up their nuclear weapons, and now they're attacked by Russia again. So maybe we need a stronger deterrent instead of going for negotiations, because negotiations depend on the power on the actual battlefield, right? Or the proposed or imaginary battlefield. So that is something I saw here, and I also heard through your talks. So I was wondering about that in particular, what all of you think about the idea of united European army. Thank you.
Thank you. You will have your hands full. These are two very opposite proposals that they're coming. So maybe one more questions, and then I will give the floor to our participants. Yes, please.
Yeah, it's a pleasure a lot when I was posted to Azerbaijan at the EU delegation there. Hi, Zaur. During the crucial time from 2020 until 2024, I was there. So I've seen the war in 2020 and the operation in 23. My impression is that what happened there was indeed long negotiations with the involvement of the OSCE Minsk group, but what happened was that then there were conflicts and there was use of force that brought to a change on the ground, and that was then followed up by peace negotiations that now brought a good result of initialing of peace agreement that you mentioned, which might have a good prospect for signing it as well. There are some conditions now by the negotiating parties that are waiting for them to be fulfilled. But what we have in Europe right now is a situation also where the use of force, Russian aggression against Ukraine, kind of violated the rules of international law. But it's a different situation. There in the South Caucasus, it was Azerbaijan kind of moving within its own internationally recognized borders. In Ukraine, we have a different situation where clearly many countries, I think all the countries, recognize the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And so we have these dynamics where also there's change in the use of technology on the ground in the sphere of military, which is impacting the assessments on both sides. And so, you also have various formats with peace negotiations happening under auspices of various international actors. And clearly you have those who are concerned in Europe. I mean, I work for the EU here. So in the case of Ukraine, we're all concerned clearly and would like to be at the table. So our leaders are always referring to the need for just and sustainable peace. And then the question is, so what is just peace? And for who it is, so who would be part of such a just peace? So would it be from the eyes of everyone, or do you have a situation of a victor and a loser? Because in some of the other conflicts that I mentioned before, you had clearly a victor and a loser in a way. And we are in a situation where most probably people want to get out of a situation of war and secure this long, sustainable and just peace. But the question is then, how do you achieve this? So how does this peace matrix help us with that?
Thank you. We wanted tough questions. We got tough questions. So I propose maybe to go in the same order. So Alexandra, would you like to go first with the...
Yes, thank you very much. I think all of the questions are very interesting. I'll try to address them in one answer. Well, maybe referring to the first two questions, you asked about security guarantees and you asked about countering Russian. You spoke about security dilemma and countering the Russian threat. And I think there are different perceptions also of what are the Russian objectives in this war. be it, invade the world, or be it a reaction on within the security dilemma. So talking about the security dilemma, here what is important to understand that's the theory of international relations when one party is basically rearming itself, perceiving a threat on the other side, then this in a way also start being perceived by the other country as a threat in itself, and then both parties start rearming, and at the end they end up with a war. So no one initially considered it as offensive armament, but as a defensive one. But at the end, given the dilemma of security, and what is very important here is deterrence without communication and without dialogue, when there is no clear understanding what are the incentives of the rearmament, and also complete denial of the security perceptions and threat perceptions of the other state, that's when we end up in a war, in the situation of security dilemma. That's why we think that it's very important to look at security threat perceptions, even though we don't need to agree with that, but that's how it works. And maybe to continue on the role of deterrence, look, this and dialogue, this idea is not that new. It already existed in 1967, the famous Harmel report. So basically, the idea of complementing deterrence by dialogue comes from NATO doctrine. It's still in NATO documents. In order for deterrence even to be credible and to be perceived in the right way by another partner, but by the other conflict party, you need to communicate your intentions, and you need to have a certain communication on that. And I think that's a big problem today, that any dialogue is perceived as a reward for good behavior, when dialogue should be in the first place in the interest of every party to have. I think I will spare the discussion about the United European Army. I was in this very room this morning when we discussed different perceptions in Europe in terms of their citizens, audience, general public, and politicians. That, as far as I remember, one of the speakers said that everyone agrees that Ukraine needs to be supported, but no one wants this to be at the expense of social economic benefits within the country of the spending. So there are also, of course, a lot of different views on that, and that's not an easy task. Coming back on the role of neutrals, well, I will actually speak at the next panel just after that, and I come from Switzerland, so that's a subject which is very close for our heart. I agree with you. I think that neutral countries are there to facilitate those discussions. However, I should say that on arms control, the big powers normally prefer to talk to each other without any intermediaries, without any facilitators. We in our center facilitated a track 1.5 strategic stability dialogue already after the 24th of February 22 between Americans and Russians. We have both experts and officials in the room, and they didn't want anyone. They tolerated us because we...
I thought about Ukraine and Russia, not the strategic...
Yeah, but also on this, the conventional arms control, the nuclear arms control, those are the issues. Of course, they would need to have a platform where it should be discussed, but that would need to happen. However, in terms of sequencing, I don't think that's the easiest task. I think there is no trust right now to get into those discussions. We need to start with some military risk reduction, then probably move to the conflict and security building measures, and only then come back to the arms control discussion, which is, of course, a key issue for the future of European security.
Thank you very much for the questions. I'll try to be brief. On neutrality, two points. First of all, I think next year Switzerland will have the chairpersonship in the OSCE, and we will see maybe some progress there in a combination of the role as a neutral country as well as the chair of the OSCE. But there is also an asterisk necessary, because what we see is neutrality is a concept that isn't kind of, you can't just write a piece of paper and say, I'm neutral. That needs to be acknowledged internationally. And what we see is that Russia perceives countries like Switzerland or Austria more and more as non-neutral. So what does neutrality mean? Just as a question back to you. On arms control, and especially the Ukrainian-Russian question, from my understanding, and that was what many Ukrainian participants in our dialogues mentioned, is for Ukraine, any arms control progress is only possible if it's kind of connected with every other level, if it's done in a pan-European context. Otherwise, they would never agree to controlling and reducing or limiting their arms, and understandably so. And that goes to the question of deterrence instead of negotiations because of power. What we try to do is make clear that we're in an age of deterrence, but despite the deterrence and because of the deterrence, we need negotiations to make clear where power lies, for example. What we've tried to do is play out what would be a scenario with only deterrence and no communication at all. It's a world where misunderstandings lead to escalation. I would believe that if the Russians knew exactly what the reactions of the world, and especially Europe and the Americans, would have been after 2022, would they have taken the same decisions? That is an example of deterrence that didn't work. So we need to be clear here. We need to kind of use the negotiations of making clear what the tools are that we have on the table and where we do have power, be it economically, be it militarily, be it politically. And on the $1 million question of what is a just peace, that is not our role to answer that. We had long discussions, especially with our Ukrainian participants, what is a peace that is acceptable, and how can this very difficult situation with an ongoing war and a huge strain on the society in Ukraine be solved in a manner that is kind of giving a future perspective. And one sentence that is burned into my mind remained here. One participant said, EU membership would be the kind of embodiment of Ukrainian victory. So this is something that we can shape. This is something that is in our hands. So the focus wasn't so much on territories, and I wouldn't be the one who says something about the territories, but I found that this is something that can bring us forward, especially if we're thinking about from a European point of view. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Tomer. It was a good and old days. So in case of Azerbaijan, Armenia, I think my assumption was different. So definitely the role of the military intervention, how to say, the liberation of the territories from occupation, they played an important role. However, if there weren't the Ukrainian war in 2022, we wouldn't have a peace agreement, or we would have still the Russian, let's say, the military base in Azerbaijan, and they're staying there. So, but what played a role, not only military, but also deterrence. And in Azerbaijan, starting the 2020 war and afterwards, the deterrent factor was Turkey. And intention, I think, was very clear to Russians, even during the war, 40 days war, that if the Russia is going to intervene on behalf of its ally, so Turkey is going to intervene too. And I think they communicated Turkish side very, how to say, very clearly to Russian side. So that's why the point that actually Russia knew that if they do this, and they're going to have the big problem with Turkey in the front. And so that's why they waited at least 40 days and not intervening, but there was other factors. So that's why, so deterrence, that plays a role being an ally, but also, how to say, second, the lesson that actually I believe that, so sometimes a Russian role is exaggerated in our domain too, that Russia knows everything, Russia designs, so if you do this, Russia will do that. So that was actually collapse in Azerbaijan-Armenian conflict. So definitely, I'm not saying that Azerbaijan-Armenian conflict is actually can be lessons for other conflict resolution, but I think how they overcome the old assumption could be a lesson for others, might not Ukraine, but other conflicts in around the world. But also, I think that just peace. I mean, I heard this just peace in the Caucasus context for many years. I mean, I think there is no just peace. So this concept is very fragmented. So there is at least a negative peace and positive peace. So negative peace is actually end of the arms. So end of the conflict. So also, but one thing also very similar to Ukraine might be the Azerbaijan case is that Azerbaijan lost 14% of their territory in 1994, so and accepted this as a reality. That so they need to build up, and then when time comes, actually they use the force. But actually, why it's difficult for Ukraine, because I think in front of Azerbaijan was Armenia, not Russia. So as a counterpart. So, but at least the assumption, so about Ukraine, about Russia and the negotiation tactics and deterrence, there could be a good lessons learned from the Azerbaijan-Armenian case. Not might be entirely the Ukrainian conflict, but also other conflict at the place.
Thank you. We have enough time to have one more round of questions. So, invite you if you have some other questions. Ask now. Yes, please.
Good afternoon. John Daniel Roch. I used to be ambassador here a long time ago before going to Turkey and other places. There is one point and two questions. The first one, you spoke of misperception and how much misperceptions can lead to an acute conflict and even to war. I think we're exactly in such a situation. And it's a very dangerous situation. That's why the efforts you are making, both of you, are so valuable, providing you can have access or bring together the right people, which is probably not so easy. In this context of perception and misperception, there is always something which is sort of striking me. We hear a lot of talk among security officials in Western Europe. We heard that recently with senior military people in France, in Germany, the need to rearm, and of course they have a public communication where the public is their own public, so that to create understanding for spending more taxes, more taxpayers' money on weapons, and the idea being to restore some sort of military balance at the end. But the way this kind of statements is interpreted in Moscow is questionable. And my question to you is, wouldn't it be healthy, wise for European government officials to combine talk about rearmament, spending more on defense, but at the same time offering some space for talking about military risk reduction, confidence, security building measures, and maybe one day going back to a kind of CFE treaty. So that's one first question. Second question. We have seen in other circumstances, including in this region, by the way, how Europe has problems to have a unified position that would really make a difference and be a stabilization factor, conflict management, or a conflict or to solve conflicts. We have seen that also in the Middle East recently. So actually, wouldn't it be the best for Europe to have a 28 Trump peace plan, just as we had on the 29th of September a 20 or 21 points Trump peace plan for the Middle East? Because you have noticed that all the Europeans immediately, they said, wonderful, we support the Trump peace plan. Wouldn't exactly the same happen if the Russians and the Americans agree on something? And actually there is a talk right now, as I think you have hinted at, about 28 points that would also include some regional security dimension. So wouldn't that be actually a good thing for the Europeans? Because they could all say, oh yeah, we like Trump. It's very dangerous not to like Trump, by the way, as we see with tariffs. So these are my 2 points or questions.
Someone else has there as well, so yes, please.
So when it comes to deterrence and all of that protection and peace and security, If we look at the history, we can see one clear deterrent, and it is mutually assured destruction. It is if all countries have nuclear weapons, then no country will attack other country, because if we look at the current situation in the world, we see that whenever Germany or some other willing countries want to help Ukraine even more, Russia threatens with nuclear weapons. So perhaps we can have, there's two ways to peace. One is to force countries to demilitarize, which is very hard to do. And the other is to just ensure that countries will not attack each other because they will know that they cannot win. Because if you look at the current situation, and maybe you can do the simulations or perhaps do it in your think tanks or something like that. Would Russia attack Ukraine if Ukraine had nuclear weapons? Most of us think it would not happen like that. So why? Because it never attacked any nuclear power. So that's the question for you. Do you think that it is more feasible or more possible to force nations to demilitarize, or is it more possible or easier to do to just proliferate nuclear weapons to all countries?
Okay. So my name is Jana, and I am Ukrainian, and that's why from this perspective I would like to put a remark on it. And I think the only way to demilitarize or just to put on sanctions, I think the one and only stuff, not because I'm only Ukrainian, but just back to historical background, I think the problem is Russia. And that stuff which Russia is doing right now, and just look at the Poland, look at the drones which have been caught up on there. Just look on the territories. Russia is touching waters, what is really, really dangerous, and they are doing these flagbacks from times to times. And I've also seen it, I'm been living in Germany for 3.5 years. And Germany has become a great support for me, for my family, and of course for my country. That's why if I'm going to be a politician, or if I'm going to have topics on that, I will be always on Germany's side. And it's one and only country for me, like one of the most important ones to protect and to be aside. But just to put that fact aside, and the fact that all the European countries are really into the help of Ukraine, and EU is really into Ukraine support and all of Ukraine supplements to prevent this war, and just for Ukraine to feel safe and for Ukraine not to have so many problems up there. EU membership would be a significant point for us, but not only that. The question is, what should we do with Russia? So we should just block it somehow, or just put strict, I don't know, more strict sanctions on it, because it's not the problem in EU, it's not the problem in all other countries of the world. Russia is one and only stone which is just blocked upon the way to a normal life and to a dignity of Ukraine and of any other nationality. That's why EU is doing it best, and I don't think that EU has any problems or EU should delegate this, regulate this. EU is doing enough. Now the question lies only to one and only country, which is blocking up all the ways for safe life, not only for Ukraine, but for the whole EU. That's it. So I think we should solve it like deeply in Russia and just thinking of what we should do with them, like with Russia as only part, because EU, Germany, all other countries were never the problem. And would it be attacking it? Of course it would, because just back to the background and back to history, Russia has been attacking all the territories all upon the history to now. Just remind of 2004 Orange Revolution, 2014 when Russian spy Yanukovych, our former president, unfortunately, flew out and just been partners with Putin. Just look at this situation right now. And I can be judging not only from the emotional side and the fact that I lost my cousin on the front line in Kharkiv, and I lost a lot of my friends. And even now, a couple of minutes ago, I just got the message that my native regions, the regions I'm from, got attacked, and there are a lot of died people. That's why I think it's only one factor which is disturbing all the world right now. Thank you.
Maybe I can misuse this opportunity because we have 10 more minutes. I would also like to ask one question that kind of sums up the talk about peace index. So if you can reflect on that one as well. But first, after comments from the ambassador and from the participants, there has been a kind of proliferation of this idea of peace measurement. This morning we had Securimeter here, we have barometers, we have indexes. I personally also running one program called Balkan Peace Index, and when we were designing, we found out almost 200 different kind of instruments that are trying to do either measure or sequence and all of that. So my question for you guys would be maybe $1 million question. Why is yours different from these 197 that already exist there? If they didn't give a question or they give what is your question, why is your question different? So is it, this one you showed us, it's only about Ukraine, but I'm sure the kind of the whole underlying structure should be applied for any other conflict. So if you can kind of explain us what is the trait that kind of differentiate this from other existing indexes or matrices, it would be kind of very good to kind of know that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'll try to answer all of these questions. Ambassador, I fully agree with you. And this would also go in the direction of kind of combining deterrence with a communication strategy, making clear where we want to go. And I think there have been opportunities missed. For example, the stationing of mid-range missiles in Germany in 2026 that was announced last year. You could have combined that with a kind of offering to Russia, look, we're doing that. That's the tools we're laying on the table. You've got time until 2026. Maybe you'll come to the table and discuss about arms control. But at the moment, and this goes into the point you made about perceptions and misperceptions, it's a lot about assuring our populations in Europe, especially in Western Europe, that they shouldn't worry and they'll be safe. And they'll be safe because we're putting lots and lots of money in lots and lots of armament without making clear what the purpose of that is and how it works. And there we need to come back to a logic where weapons serve a purpose, and our defense minister in Germany posed that we do have the weapons so not to fight a war. But at the moment, it's not very clearly communicated. The idea of a Trumpian peace plan would be the easy way out for European politicians. And it would be probably the convenient way, so not to ask the hard questions and take on the responsibility Europe needs to have. I think it would be a bad peace plan for Europe as well, because again, European security would be defined by third parties, and the United States is a third party. At the moment, I'm afraid that this is the way we're going. What we've seen is that any idea, and I wouldn't say that these are very good ideas brought forward by the US administration, is kind of, first of all, Europeans very much like it, so it's very good, it's brilliant, and then the obstacles are brought on the table. So we're kind of being the obstacles, being the ones trying to put the brakes on these peace plans without having our own proposals, and I think this is absolutely necessary. On the deterrence and mutual assured destruction, that's a very European debate. If we start discussing proliferating nuclear weapons to every country, that would be very difficult for a lot of other countries, non-aligned countries that are forcing forward non-proliferation of nuclear weapons into these perception of double standards in Europe. So we have a war in Europe, so we need to proliferate nuclear weapons. If you have a war in Africa, that's your problem. I don't think that's the way to go. It's far too dangerous. And it's not about forcing countries to disarm. Arms control is not about forcing. You can force a country if you win a war, like in Germany in 1945. But it's not about forcing. It's about understanding on both sides that investing more in weapons won't make you safer. If both sides have 1,000 tanks, and I'm Greek, so if you look at the Greek-Turkish border, In Greece, you have as many tanks, you could block the whole land border to Turkey. Does that make us safer if we have double these tanks? And I don't believe so. It makes us poorer. So if there is an understanding, you can go towards disarmament. And on your point of Russia as a problem, that's exactly the point. We have Russia as a problem, but we can't make it go away. We can't even make it the North Korea of Europe because it's too big and it's too many borders. We have too many problems crossing our kind of connecting lines with Russia. So we need to manage that. And the whole idea is to make clear that we need to manage it on a whole range of issues, be it migration, be it deterrence, being the Arctic, be it the Black Sea. We have so many focal points where escalation could happen and where the sovereignty of Ukraine is threatened. So we need to manage that and we need to prepare. That's exactly the point. On Nemanja's question of the peace measurement, we're not trying to measure peace here. What we're trying to kind of illustrate and visualize is the structural necessities towards a more stable European security order. We named it the Peace Matrix to have a kind of a fancy title, but I would be happy if we could kind of use it to stabilize the situation in Europe more and more. That is something, that is an ambition that is already very high. Peace, and here I think Zaur made a very good point, is maybe one step too far. Thanks.
Yeah, well, thanks once again for the questions. I think Christos replied most of them. I think I would just support his point that we're not talking about dichotomy here, either demilitarization or nuclear non-proliferation in the world. I think Christos commented on the dangers of nuclear proliferation, which basically is not in the interest of anyone on this planet. And what we are arguing here is not about demilitarization. That's a very important point. Again, we consider that deterrence is a necessity in the current situation. It should be there. Again, it's hard to imagine how it could be there in the long term, because at a certain point, in 30 years, probably our kids will be tired of investing non-stop in rearmament, in weapons, and would like to find way and solution and to have dialogue and to have at least a peaceful coexistence with their big neighbor. But at least in the short and the medium term, that's clear necessity. But again, to avoid the risk of unintended escalation and major war, some sort of dialogue is clearly needed. I realized also that I didn't comment on your question about the settlement, what would be considered as a fair peace. Today I didn't hear this from the audience, but very often we say how we can have dialogue when there is no trust. And we agree with this. At the same time, how we can build trust without dialogue. So, you know, it's like a chicken and egg problem here. What would be a very useful tool to build trust in a longer term is the negotiated settlement, not a zero-sum game when one of the sides wins this war. It's not a sustainable settlement. There will be, of course, some revenge taken by the other side in a few years. But if we want to achieve a sustainable peace in Europe, it's very important to have a negotiated settlement which is considered fair by all sides of the conflict. And that's, of course, not an easy task. So in our thinking, we discussed a few points that could be part of this potential peace deal, or at least the principles that need to be there. Well, first of all, of course, we need to have a very good negotiated ceasefire with clear mechanisms and modalities. That's very important, because a bad ceasefire, a quickly imposed ceasefire, will not hold, and that would undermine any future ceasefires. So ceasefire is also a process that really need to be negotiated. Take example of the Korean Peninsula, the ceasefire, the armistice between the two Koreas. It took 555 meetings just to agree on all the modalities. So it's not that leaders meet and sign a ceasefire. It's a very, very complicated process with demilitarized zones, with a lot of modalities in there. And so the second part would be probably at the same time to at least agree on the principles of the framework agreement. And what should be there? Well, first is, of course, the security guarantees. That is something very important. I think that is something that we're lacking right now, this clear vision in Europe, what kind, for instance, the security guarantees could be provided. We talk about European peacekeepers, we talk about reassurance force, we talk about, it's never clear what would be those forces, where they will be positioned between the parties. Well, this will never be accepted. Behind, the Ukrainian army on the Ukrainian territory, will it be in the neighboring European country? I think this needs to be clear defined. Again, the communication here and the clear definition of what security guarantee means is very, very important. The territorial questions, of course, would be part of this settlement. Reparations, reconstructions of Ukraine linked to the relief of sanctions, that would be also part of the future settlement. Accountability for war crimes, and the question of minority rights, which in Ukraine, that should not be considered as a concession to Russia and to the Russian demands, but as part of the EU membership for Ukraine. So it seems now that this is a compromise that is there. On the Russian side, there was a statement that EU membership for Ukraine is acceptable. And if those issues would come as part of adopting the EU acquis, is very important for Ukraine. It will be beneficial also for Ukrainian society. So I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. I will add one thing about this. I mean, so we talk about a fair peace, just peace, but I think statistically, you know that the 50% of the peace agreement is going to fail or collapse within the first few years. So this is actually a statistic from the observing in the more than the 100 the agreement. So that's why I mean, where I come, I think I don't see a comprehensive peace agreement that you actually discuss how this discussion is ongoing in Europe. So, because firstly the war should end, and then other elements should come, and also, so it also tells about something about Ukraine, that I think ultimate goal is that ending of the war in Ukraine, but also not to stopping helping the Ukraine after the end of the war. So this should be actually the mentality. Otherwise, I think whether statistically or otherwise, is going the Russia will come back. So this is only the resilience, not on the words, but also on the work. So this could be a game changer in the future of the Ukrainian, how to say, statehood.
Thank you. And I would like first to thank to our panelists for very insightful and great presentations, and to all of you for coming and participating and asking questions and giving comments. And with this we conclude this panel. Thank you so much.